Maybe, probably, hopefully, could, and should. These are all horrible words in the automotive repair industry. And this customer here who owns this 2012 Ford F250 with the service box on it, it's a work truck, he has been suffering from the coulds or shoulds or maybes, or probably is. What I mean by that is he's got an oil leak problem on this truck, and he's had it all over town for someone to tell him what's wrong with it. He's getting a lot of, it could be this, or maybe it's that, or it's probably this, let's try this, etc., etc. So in this video here, we're going to avoid the maybes and coulds and could be's and probably is and let's try this is. We're going to get rid of all that, and we're going to find out some things. It's just an oil leak. So what's the beauty about an oil leak? You can see the oil. So if you can see the oil, then you can look for it. And if you can follow where the oil came from, you can figure out what's leaking. So you got to start from the bottom and work your way up, because gravity is a real thing, and we have to use gravity sometimes to find the problem with a vehicle. Now, this truck here has been laid up for months. It's burning oil, it's smoking, and it's dripping oil all over the place. Now, it's had some repairs done on it, which were, I'm locked out, which were unsuccessful. I'm gonna show you what they did. Now, we made a video on an F250 or a 350 not long ago where I had conducted this exact repair for an oil leak. Let me show you what's in the truck here. This is the crankcase ventilation filter system right here, and the air filter, I might add. So clearly, it probably needed an oil filter, or an air filter, I'd say. Yeah, that's pretty nasty. But this guy right here, not the Yoo-hoo, this is the CCV box. That's crankcase ventilation, CCV. What this guy does is it takes crankcase pressure caused by combustion gas blow-by that gets past the pistons, and it makes its way down to the bottom of the engine. That gas will build up pressure, and then it has to go somewhere. Now, back in the day, that used to just be released into the atmosphere. The problem with that is it brought with it hydrocarbons, atomized oil, pollutants that smell bad, things of that nature. So what the engineers have done on the 6.7 Ford diesel is they've engineered this little filter device right here, and it will siphon off pressure from the crankcase, run it through a filter, and then send it back through this tube. That's our gases that's been cleaned of the oil. It'll send that back into the engine's intake stream, and then the engine will take those gases, which contain hydrocarbons and pollutants, etc., and it'll just reburn those through the engine. Now, what happens is on these boxes is the filter element inside of there will clog up. So now that pressure cannot vent back into the intake, so it can go back through the engine, then ultimately out of the exhaust, and it just remains built up inside of the engine's crankcase. Now, what happens when you have a crankcase with pressure inside of it and oil and things like that? That pressure will force the engine oil out of the seals, usually the rear crankshaft seal and the front crankshaft seal, because those are immersed in oil mostly. So that's usually the leaker area. Now, somebody has already gone ahead, and hopefully that was going to fix the problem. They replaced the CCV box, and we found out that the vehicle is still smoking and leaking oil. So the next guy said, well, maybe it's a head gasket, or it's probably a turbo. Well, after spending $1,000-something to have that fixed, my guy doesn't want to go off of maybes and probablys and hopefullys and could be's and all those horrible words when it comes to spending your money. So today, we're going to find out exactly what's causing the leak on this work truck 2012 Ford 6.7 liter F250. Black subscribe button. If you like this kind of content, do me a solid, like and subscribe the video as we get going. It lets me and YouTube know that this is the stuff you guys are looking for. And that helps other people discover the content as well. It helps us out tremendously here at the channel. Thank you very much. Anyway, moving on up, we're gonna take a look at the underneath carriage of this 250. We're gonna see a bunch of oil, and then we're gonna go on a fact-finding mission to see where it's coming from. So stay tuned. This is gonna be a very good inspection video. So this particular truck has a very high level of built-in gravity. This is a 14,000 pound capacity 4-post lift, and it's kind of struggling to get this truck up in the air. We're going all the way up so I can walk under it, about 6 feet or so. Yeah, there's some mass here, you guys. Definitely some mass. All right, that's my fourth click. Set it down on the lock mechanism here. We're heavy, go slow. I don't like to jostle heavy vehicles on big racks. No. Okay, so let's go down below, set up some illuminators here. Let's see what we can see. There's some oil leaking. Now that almost looks like it's the upper oil pan. That's a notorious leaker on these Fords right here. These oil pan gaskets, you see that? That's kind of a big job. I think you have to pull the transmission out to change it. Lower oil pan could be leaking. Somebody's sealed this up before. There's gasket material falling out of it. You see that right there? So this is probably also leaking. That could be leaking. That's the oil pressure sending unit. Ford Motorcraft engine oil filter. There's some oil right there. There's some oil. You see it's running all the way back here. It's all over the diesel particulate filter. We discussed these DPFs not long ago on a Duramax video that was actually deleted, but this is a prime example of a gigantic $4,000 exhaust filter right there. The last truck we worked on, like I said, was deleted, so all of these sensors and exhaust detecting equipment was not present on that last vehicle. We got a temp probe there. That looks like it's the DPF injector right there. Let's see what else we got here. There's another sensor way up there. See that temp probe? There should be another one on top somewhere. There's a couple back here. Yep, so sensors and wires running into the exhaust. Welcome to modernity. Anyway, moving on. Let's refocus. So we've got a bunch of stuff leaking oil. There's oil everywhere. There's even oil all the way up here on this cylinder head. You see that? Now that could have been from the CCV leaking, but it could be something else. This is maybe it's a head gasket or probably a head gasket. I don't think it's a head gasket problem. I've never encountered a 6.7 with a blown up head gasket. It's not a 6.0. I guess Ford learned from their mistakes and circled the problem. But I do see some oil right here, okay? So I can assume this lower pan is leaking based on the visual condition of the sealing material right here. We can assume that that upper oil pan is leaking because that's a known leaker on these Fords, and we've got a drip right here. Oh, by the way, fun fact about warranty oil leaks, okay? If you buy yourself a new car and you have it looked at and somebody sees, let me find a good example of it. Not on this truck, everything's soaking wet. But if you see some oil where it's just like residue around an area, like let's say there's oil residue, pretend that's not a coolant pipe, pretend it's oil. Let's say there's just some residue right here, right? And you're like, hey, that looks a little wet. Warranty, can you replace this pipe for an oil leak? Well, warranty defines a leak as something with a drip. That seepage that you see where it's wet or discolored, they will not warranty that because it has to produce a drip in order for it to be considered a leak. That right there would be considered a drip. So if this was a warranty vehicle, this oil pan would be covered under warranty. The saturation on the pipe would not be covered under warranty because it does not qualify as a leak. I realize that some people would disagree with that, but I did not write the warranty rules. I just know what they are. Anyway, I do not think that it's got a head gasket. I highly doubt that it has like valve covers leaking because I've never seen that leak on these things either. So let's let her back down and take a look at the top side first because we saw oil on the back of that engine running down the exhaust. So let's go see if we can see anything leaking down on that unit. So raising back up, second chance, black subscribe button, off the locks, magnet, and down we go. Beautiful. All the way down. My rack's gonna get a workout today, fellas. Definitely getting a workout today. And I started too soon. Contact. There we go. Like air brakes. All right. Let's see if we can't climb up here a little bit here. Okay, so we have a lot of we got a lot of plumbing here. There's boost pipes, intake pipes, AC pipes, fuel line pipes. I see some diesel sitting on top of that injector right there. Look, see that shiny fuel injector? Right there. Follow this thing. Yeah, right there, pointing right at it. That one. There's a bunch of fuel inside of that. Why is there fuel on the top of that injector? Somebody's been messing around inside of here. Why did they have the injectors loose? Okay, that's where our CCV box plugs in to the intake right there. That corrugated looking little pipe there, that's the outlet tube. I see no oil around that. Again, this is the replacement CCV, but there's no oil leaking all over the place here. It's just not happening. Oh, let's see, out back, I have no visual indicator. Hang on, let me take my mount off this camera. We're gonna stick you guys way back in the hole. Set that down. Fact-finding missions. What do we see back here? We've got a turbocharger. That's our turbo. I don't see any oil down there. All right, come on out. Let's go check the other side, passenger side. This whole huge contraption right here, that's the EGR cooler, exhaust gas recirculation. That's another device that takes exhaust gases, runs them through this cooler, which contains engine coolant. There's a second radiator on this truck just for this EGR. So once the second radiator cools off the coolant in the EGR, it can cool the exhaust gases off and then send those back into the intake stream, so it can also be burned a second time through the engine. But looking down, still not seeing any oil. Nothing here on the top side and nothing over here. So our leak is primarily focused on the driver's side and the rear side. Now at the top of the turbo, see that pipe right there in the back? I don't see anything saturated around that area either. So let's look inside of the turbo. All right, we're moving back up. One other fun fact about diesels. You guys see that right there? DEF? That is the fill nozzle for diesel exhaust fluid. They spray that into the exhaust stream in order to facilitate a chemical catalyst that can change some of the exhaust gases into a less harmful gas. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but there's a major problem with DEF. The major problem with DEF is not compatible with diesel injection systems, okay? See, diesel fuel injectors, they run under intense heat, and there's a lot of pressure inside of there. Intense pressure and intense heat. And there's metal components inside of there moving around. So we use the fuel that flows through the injectors as a lubricant for those injectors. The same theory also applies to your injection pump. That's the pump that gives you that 10, 15, 20, 30,000 PSI of fuel pressure, okay? Now, what happens, and what the manufacturers have done in a lot of cases, and this doesn't really apply to these service bodies, but a regular truck, this will apply, especially on some of the older GMs. The DEF cap and the fuel cap are often right next to each other. And what happens is folks will accidentally install diesel exhaust fluid into their diesel fuel system. They'll go out in the morning to dump their gallon of DEF in, or they'll grab the wrong little thing at the gas pump or whatever, and they'll put the wrong fluid into the wrong tank. Now, you won't know what happens until you start driving. And what'll happen is that DEF will make its way through the fuel system. The fuel system is no longer lubricating itself, so it starts eating itself alive. Imagine you run an engine with no oil in it, like this. It'll eat itself alive. Well, the fuel system does the same thing when you starve it of diesel fuel and you replace the diesel with DEF or a partial mixture of DEF. It's highly corrosive. So if you put DEF in the wrong tank, you're gonna cost yourself $12,000 to $15,000 because you've got to replace a set of fuel injectors, all 8, all the lines, the injection pump, the filters. You got to clean out the fuel tank by removing the fuel tank. You have to dispose of all of the contaminated fuel, and maybe even a lift pump or two. because that DEF crystallizes as soon as it is exposed to air. So it contaminates every single piece of the fuel system, and the whole thing must be serviced or replaced. It's extremely common for it to happen, and it's extremely expensive. Now, I like what they did here, where they put the DEF nozzle far away from the gas tank nozzle or diesel tank nozzle. Anyway, let's move on with our fact finding here. So we found at least 2 leaks here. That lower pan's leaking and the upper pan's leaking. I suspect there's a leak up there somewhere. So let's bust out the camera on a stick and stick it up there and see what we can see. Okay, here's how we're gonna do this. We've got a camera set up on a transmission jack just below the engine. I'm gonna reach up right here and we're gonna follow this exhaust pipe. You guys hang out right down here, keep an eyeball on that screen so you can see what we're looking at, and then perhaps we can figure out what's leaking, or at least give us a clue. Let's see. So we're at the pipe right here. There's the pipe. We're going up, and I'm looking at you. Okay. So moving up, we're following the oil from in front of the pipe. You see right there. There's a pipe connection that has oil on it. See that? And then go up a little further. See, there's a V band. Let me find that clamp. Well, I'm reaching way up, yo. Y'all, way yo.
Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying, yo.
Well, my name is Skylar White, yo. My husband is Walter White, yo. Uh-huh.
Okay, I think that is another pipe on the turbocharger, covered in oil, right there. And then you see that clamp right there? There's more oil at the bottom of that clamp. So I'm almost wondering if we have a turbocharger that's leaking internally and or externally. Maybe both. Like I said, the customer had complained that it was blowing some smoke while running. It did not smoke when we pulled it in and when we drove the thing earlier, but that doesn't mean we had the right temperatures to gain some smoke. I think we have a turbocharger leak. So what I'd like to do is fetch my flashlight before it dies. We're gonna look right here. We're gonna take that bolt loose and that bolt loose, crack this exhaust open slightly, and see if a bunch of engine oil pours out of the exhaust. If we have oil pouring out of the exhaust, then it stands to reason that it's leaking from the turbocharger, because there is a seal in that turbo. In fact, I've got one over here. I'll show you where it's located. I've got a prop turbo from a Mazda. So this guy, you've got your compressor and your turbine, right? There's a shaft running through that connects those two wheels. Fundamentally principled, or the principal fundamentals rather, my brain's going fast, is that your exhaust gases will come through, act on the one turbine, which we can't see because it's dark. There we go. It'll act on that turbine, turn that turbine because the exhaust is moving through. So it's going to turn the fan blade, which in turn will turn the shaft, and then turn that fan blade, and then that's going to suction in the air, pressurize it, and then send it out to the engine. Well, that shaft has to be lubricated, and the turbocharger has to be cooled. So you're going to have an oil line running into it to lubricate the bearings, a drain line so the oil can leave and go back to the engine, and some coolant lines to keep the whole thing nice and cool. Well, what can happen is inside of here, the seal can fail, and that can allow engine oil that's pressurized to escape from the seal and end up on the turbine side, or even worse, it can end up on the compressor side, and then that oil will be pumped into the engine as fuel, and that's how you get yourself a runaway diesel. See, this is one of those situations where you can't just tell the customer, hey, I found out you have leaking oil pans, and then go with that. You gotta find all of it. Because let's say I go with the lowest hanging fruit. That is nasty. And I go inside and I tell this guy, hey man, you need to You need to put some oil pans on this. You need to do the upper and the lower. It's about an 18-hour job. Costs some time and some money. And then he goes and approves it reluctantly because he's going, well, you know, I need the truck and it's kind of worth it, and that's a lot of money, but sure, I'll go ahead and have you fix it. Then what you do is you go ahead and fix the oil pan leaks over here. You send it on its way. Now, mind you, when you drove it, you still didn't have that smoking out of the tailpipe syndrome, and you also, as the technician, you kind of just ignored that because you had leaks staring at you in the face. So what'll happen next is the customer will take their truck back. I need a pry bar. The customer will take their truck back. They'll bring it back to you the next day saying, hey man, it's still leaking everywhere. What's going on? Then you go, oh, well, let's look at it. Then you tell them, hey, I found it needs a turbo, or it's got a head gasket or something. If you do that, then you've created a bad situation. Excuse me, I have to answer the phone. Sorry, I'm back. I had to get the phone. I've got some programmers over the interwebs installing operating software remotely on this Ford Explorer over here. We put an electronic power steering rack in the unit, and the module is built into the rack because it's electronic. So we had to install the operating software on the module. And I don't install software, so I had to get an outside company to do such things. Anyway, back over, what were we doing? We were looking for a pry bar to pry open that exhaust, and then we're gonna stick a camera in the exhaust. That's right, back on track now, back on track. It's not the pry bar drawer. This is the pry bar drawer. There we go. Mercedes. Look at this right here. This is the sway bar torque sensor. That's the sensor right there. Some linkages. When this sway bar right here twists during a cornering event, this contraption right here will sense how much body roll the vehicle is experiencing, and it will hydraulically actuate the struts with a pump to maintain a level body. That was Mercedes technology in 1999. Now we have cars that jump up and down. Fanciness. Anyways, Dave's snickered. Let's try to get this pry bar action in here. Separate this exhaust piece real quick, and maybe we're gonna find a boatload of engine oil inside of there. If we find this is full of oil, and I think it is, it's gonna tell us a couple things. One of which is that we need to get an inspection camera to look inside of these holes right here. Let me shove that in a little deeper. That'll do. All right, that's separated. Let's get the cam back out. Check it out. I clipped you guys to the camera. Now we have inspection camera cam. Hey, poor quality resolution on that feedback loop, wasn't it? So anyway, there's our exhaust. Okay, looky here. See all that shiny wet business right there? That is on the wall of the pipe right around this area right here. That's our entrance. There's the start of the exhaust filter, which from the inside, let me turn this camera around. So there is the front face of the filter. Let me scooch it in a little bit farther. There we go. See that honeycomb in there? Oh, backed off some. A little closer. You guys see the honeycomb? We're starting to get some restriction on it. All those little specks. Oh yeah, look at all that oil there. You guys see that? Yeah, we've got some clog on the side. This is actually probably the bottom, but we are starting to get restriction and that particulate filter on the bottom. See all that? So what we have here is a failed turbocharger seal. This vehicle is going to need a turbo. In fact, this vehicle is out of service and should not be operated on the road whatsoever. For reasons that we spoke about earlier, if that oil, instead of going out of the exhaust side, somehow starts making its way to the intake side, like let's say that damaged seal in there blows out even further, or the bearing goes out on the shaft, which then damages the seal, it could send that oil right into the compressor side of the turbocharger, which will 100% cause a runaway, and it will burn this truck to the absolute ground. So it is imperative that this be repaired before this vehicle remains in service. We need to install a replacement turbocharger. Probably is going to need some filters. It needs a pressure washer. The least of the concerns is this area of the oil leak here, but it should be known that if we change the turbo, that's still going to be leaking. So we actually have a couple major problems. Considering the age and mileage on this truck, it may not be worth it to the guy to fix it. That is not my call. I just present the information as I see it, and then we go from there. So I'm gonna go ahead and build the estimate on this. We're gonna look for a turbocharger. I'm not gonna use aftermarket. It's gonna be an OEM replacement only. If I were to put like an aftermarket, like a performance turbo on or something like that, I would have to have a tune written to accommodate the different turbo, and we're not doing that. So it's gonna be OEM or not at all. Okay, so just to do my due diligence, we're gonna start this engine. Just to check it for some smoke. I put the exhaust thing back on, that's why it's super quiet. Yeah, we're not getting any smoke yet. So that means it's only happening. Yeah, we got flow, okay. That means it's only happening under certain temperature conditions. So we either have to have enough load, enough pressure, or enough heat, or a combination of all of the above in order to get the smoking event to occur. But the leak is there at all times, as evident by the amount of oil inside of it. So we've got a confirmed diag on this one. We need to replace the turbine charger on this 2012 F350. That's what she needs. Not a super duper fun job, but it can be done nonetheless. So I'm gonna go estimate this, call the guy, and we'll see what's gonna happen with this. If I get a yay, then we make videos about a turbo. If I get a nay, then well, we'll make a video about something else later on. So that being said, guys, this one's all done. Let me know what you think about this video, as always, in the comment section down below. Do not forget to engage that like and subscribe button while you're down there if you like this kind of content and would like to see more. And most importantly, have yourselves a fantastic day. See you guys later in a video, in a day, in a F250 turbocharger, in a transmission.